What he doesn't realize is that the fish he catches does contain the nutrients he needs. They're just in parts that he usually discards. As his body is about to shut down, Steve finds his tastes taking a bizarre turn.
I was less and less interested in the fish flesh and more interested in things like fish eyes and the little plates between the vertebrae and fresh fish liver and fish roe, and basically ate almost all of the interior of the fish with the exception of the stomach itself.
Unconsciously, with death looming, Steve consumes the nutrients that can keep him alive. Only now are we working out why a man could eat and even enjoy what he'd normally find repulsive. Realizing something's missing in Steve's diet, his want center generates intensive cravings, driving him to eat anything to satisfy them. This survival instinct forced our ancestors to try anything to keep their diets in balance, to the point of overriding taste. Chili peppers, to avoid being eaten, evolved a flavor animals can't tolerate. That flavor comes from a chemical that burns our mouths. Even so, we eat them. That's because our brain knows survival can depend on pushing the limits. A red chili contains 4 times the vitamin C that's in an orange. So that we can absorb that essential chemical, our brain has learned to overcome discomfort. Eating chilies bombards the brain with pain signals. In response, the brain releases endorphins, natural painkillers that induce sensations of pleasure. The chili's heat activates the brain's learning center. It stores the memory that despite a fierce flavor, chilies are rich in nutrients and a peculiar pleasure.
So if you can get used to the initial pain of the chili, the endorphins then become a pleasant response. So people actually get used to eating things they're not supposed to eat, like chili peppers, like onions and garlic.
To keep Steve Callahan eating what he needs, his brain uses a similar tactic. Triggering a sensation of pleasure whenever he digests needed nutrients, his brain transformed fish parts that once disgusted him into delicious treats.
Like my body was constantly telling me, you need this physically, and was changing my psychology. I wasn't eating fresh fish liver because I had to, but because my mind was telling me, hey, that's great stuff, that's dessert.
Steve Callahan is rescued after 76 days. Steered by his brain, not only has he saved his own life, he's eaten his way to very good health. The brain's power over diet is core to our survival. So powerful that scientists have tested it against one of the strongest human urges. They fitted volunteers with electrodes to record brain activity. Then they compared how our pleasure centers respond when we eat chocolate and when we kiss. Not surprisingly, when couples kissed, their pleasure centers reacted. But kissing couldn't touch the effect achieved when chocolate hit the tongue. That pleasure was more intense and lasted longer. Our obsession with eating makes perfect evolutionary sense. During most of human history, food has been scarce. That experience drives us to gorge when we can and store nutrients for survival. But even when food runs out completely, our brain has a response. The want center, buried at the brain's base, has instructions for beating starvation. This cell bundle saved a French cave explorer's life. He expected a one-day adventure underground. It became the greatest challenge he ever endured. Jean-Luc Jossois is deep in a 15-mile maze of caves. He has no way out and no food. He has no idea how to cope with this nightmare. But the unconscious part of his brain unlocks a survival mechanism, changing the way his body works, letting him do what no machine can: run on empty. This brilliant strategy may hold the key to a longer life for all of us. Just above the spine is the human brain's most ancient part. The want center kept our ancestors alive when food ran out. Now, it's Jean-Luc Jossois' only hope of escaping death. In animals, this part of the brain evolved around the time of the dinosaurs, before mammals existed. It's hardwired to beat starvation. For 3 days, Jean-Luc has been trapped underground. He hasn't had a morsel to eat. He doesn't know it, but his brain is changing how his body functions and how he behaves.
There are a couple of different brain centers that regulate feeding behavior as well as hunger. They're in different parts of the central part of the brain called the hypothalamus. And in that part of the brain, you're really driven to seek out food, to eat almost anything, to try to stop yourself from starving to death.
To drive Jean-Luc's search for food, his brain first releases a hormone, orexin. Orexin comes in tiny doses, but it has a profound effect. This hormone makes us more alert, improves our muscle efficiency, making us better hunters. It even sharpens our problem-solving skills. For days, Jean-Luc scours the caves. He finds water, but nothing to eat. He starts to fear the worst.
Even if, when I had a little hope, I thought obsessively what would happen over the last few days, or the last hours before dying. It was a big question. How I would die. Was it going to be cold or hunger, or... It was a question that I always had in my head.
Sure that he's doomed, he records a message. But as hope fades, Jean-Luc's brain switches strategy to help him survive with no food. With his fuel stores depleted, his body becomes even more efficient. It makes him slow down. Now, his muscles use less energy. So do all his internal organs. New cells grow more slowly. Non-essentials, fingernails, toenails, hair, hardly grow at all. Jean-Luc is entering a survival state that evolved to keep starving animals alive until they could get to food. This enforced efficiency, which kicks in when we're at our limit, may have bigger implications. Some say it could help us all live longer. In a recent trial, researchers compared semi-starved rats to those fed a normal diet. Surprisingly, the less the rats ate, the longer they lived. Some animals' lifespans doubled. Based on these findings, some people drastically cut their food intake, hoping to live longer. The average American adult consumes almost 4,000 calories a day. Brian Delaney eats half that. He's trying to fool his brain into staying in super efficient starvation mode.
Right now, I take in about 1,950 calories per day. At the most strict, I was eating about 1,650 calories per day.
If the theory holds, this could slow the aging process. It seems to work. When people who slash their caloric intake were compared with normal